Hello friends. Did you know that nearly 80% of those who watch my videos aren't subscribed? If you enjoy the content, I'd truly appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button. It helps a lot. Also, don't forget to leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. Your interaction not only supports the channel's growth, but also helps these stories reach more people. Thank you all for being here. By the way, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. The load was light that night. Just empty chemical drums heading back to the depot in Louisville. I'd been running Interstate 65 through Kentucky for 12 years, knew every curve, every rest stop, every spot where the state troopers like to hide with their radar guns. It was past 2 in the morning when I saw the Buick, parked crooked on the shoulder, hazards still blinking weak orange in the darkness. Door hanging open like someone left in a hurry. I've passed 1,000 abandoned cars over the years. Usually out of gas, maybe a blown tire, sometimes just drunks who wandered off into the woods to take a leak and got lost. But something about this one made me ease off the accelerator. Maybe it was how new the car looked. One of those fancy sedans with the chrome trim and leather seats you could smell from 10 feet away. Maybe it was the way the interior light was still on. Battery not dead yet, which meant it hadn't been sitting there long. Or maybe it was the briefcase on the passenger seat, expensive-looking thing with gold clasps that caught my headlights as I rolled past. I pulled over about 50 yards ahead and sat there for a minute, engine idling. The CB was quiet, just static and the occasional distant chatter from truckers too far away to make out clearly. I grabbed my flashlight from the glove box, one of those heavy mag lights that doubles as a club if needed, and walked back along the shoulder. The night was humid, that thick Kentucky summer air that makes you sweat just standing still. Crickets were going strong in the grass, and somewhere far off I could hear another rig grinding through its gears on some distant hill. The Buick was a 2018 model, practically showroom fresh. Tennessee plates. When I got closer, I could see papers scattered across the driver's seat, some spilled onto the floor. The keys were still in the ignition, engine off but the electronics still running. Radio playing so soft I could barely hear it. Some talk show host droning on about government conspiracies. I swept the flashlight around the interior. No blood, no signs of struggle, nothing broken, just empty. The briefcase was real leather, the kind that costs more than I make in a month. It wasn't locked. Inside, I found what looked like medical records. Thick manila folders with patient information. X-rays held up to the dome light, showing ribs and spine. The name on the files was Pearl Caffrey, address in Nashville. There were prescription bottles too, the kind they give you after surgery. Heavy stuff. But what caught my attention was the notebook tucked into the lid pocket. Handwritten notes, messy like someone was writing while driving. Following since Memphis. The first line read, "Black truck, no plates, knows my route." The writing got worse as it went on, shaky and desperate. Tried 3 exits, he's still there, can't see driver. The last entry just said, pulling over. Maybe he'll pass. But there was more. Under the notebook, wrapped in plastic like evidence, was a smartphone with the screen cracked but still working. The last video was still up, paused on a frame that showed the view out the back window. I hit play. The video was shaky, obviously filmed while driving. You could hear Pearl breathing hard, almost panting. The camera focused on a shape in the darkness behind her, headlights following too close. Then she spoke, voice tight with fear. "If something happens to me, his name is Hoyt Maddox. I treated him at Baptist General 3 months ago. Liver surgery, he shouldn't have survived what they found inside him." The truck behind her flashed its high beams and she swore, camera swinging wildly. He's been calling the hospital wanting his records destroyed. Wanting the samples destroyed. I couldn't. I had to report it to the CDC. They found something. The video cut off. I stood there on the shoulder, 18-wheeler thundering past close enough to feel the wind push against me. The smart thing would have been to call the state police, report the abandoned vehicle, let them handle whatever this was. But I looked at that name again. Pearl Caffrey. She was scared enough to document this, scared enough to keep evidence. I pocketed the phone and the notebook, then went back to my rig to grab some road flares. Marked the Buick's location nice and bright so the cops would find it. That should have been the end of it. Should have driven away, made my delivery, forgotten about Pearl Caffrey and her medical records. But when I climbed back into my cab, there was someone sitting in the passenger seat. Not sitting exactly, more like they'd been placed there. Arranged, careful, and deliberate. It was a woman, maybe 40, wearing hospital scrubs. Her skin had that gray tone that comes after the blood stops moving. Eyes open, but seeing nothing. Pearl Caffrey, based on the ID badge still clipped to her pocket. I scrambled out of the cab so fast I nearly fell off the running board. Stood there in the darkness, flashlight beam jumping around wild, looking for whoever put her there. But the lot was empty. Just me and my rig and the dead woman who hadn't been there 5 minutes ago. Then I heard it, coming from somewhere behind my trailer. Whistling, slow and casual, like someone taking a walk on a nice evening. The tune was familiar but wrong, notes bent in places they shouldn't bend. I circled wide, keeping the trailer between me and the sound, flashlight held like a weapon. Hoyt Maddox stood at the back of my trailer, examining the door locks with the kind of focus you'd give a puzzle. He was tall, too tall, like someone had stretched a normal person past their limits. His clothes were normal enough, jeans and a work shirt, but they hung wrong on his frame. When he turned to look at me, his neck moved too far, had to rotate his shoulders to bring his head back to center. His face was incomplete somehow, like a sketch where the artist forgot to add the final details. Features that should have been sharp were blurred, shadows where there should have been substance. "You found her car," he said, and his voice came from too deep in his chest, resonating in frequencies that made my teeth ache. "That's unfortunate." I needed more time to clean things properly. He took a step toward me, and I saw his legs bend in too many places, joints that humans don't have, shouldn't have. She had something that belongs to me. Several somethings, actually. Pieces they cut out, samples they kept. You understand why I can't let those exist. I backed toward the cab, keeping the light on him. He didn't seem to mind, just kept walking forward with that horrible, articulated gait. "The authorities already have her files," I lied. "Found them an hour ago. Whatever you're trying to hide, it's too late." He stopped, tilted his head so far to the side his ear nearly touched his shoulder. Then he smiled, or did something with his face that might have been a smile if his mouth had worked the way mouths are supposed to work. "No," he said simply, "they don't. Because you're the kind of man who stops for abandoned cars, the kind who checks on strangers, the kind who keeps evidence because you think you're helping." He gestured at my cab where Pearl's body still sat. She thought she was helping too, reporting abnormalities, documenting anomalies. Do you know what they found when they opened me up? How many extra organs I had. How many things that shouldn't exist in a human body but do in mine. The notebook in my pocket felt heavy as lead. I knew I should run, get in the truck and drive, but Pearl Caffrey was still in my passenger seat and this thing that called itself Hoyt Maddox stood between me and anywhere else. "What are you?" The question came out before I could stop it. He laughed, a sound like grinding gears wrapped in meat. "I'm a patient," he said. "A medical curiosity, a case study that should have been burned instead of filed. But mostly, I'm someone who needs privacy." He moved faster than anything that size should move, covering the distance between us in 2 impossible strides. His hand, too many fingers with too many joints, reached for my throat. I swung the flashlight hard, connected with his temple. It felt like hitting a bag of wet cement, solid but yielding in all the wrong ways. He staggered back, black fluid leaking from the wound. Not blood, something thicker, darker, with an oily sheen that reflected rainbow patterns in the flashlight beam. "That was unnecessary," he said, touching the wound with those awful fingers. "Now, you've seen too much, too." But I was already running, yanking open the driver's door and diving inside. Started the engine and threw it in gear just as his hand slapped against the window, leaving a smear of that black substance. I drove hard, didn't stop until I hit a truck stop bright with lights and full of people. Called 911 from a payphone, reported the abandoned Buick and the body in my truck. When the cops arrived, Pearl Caffrey was gone. No body, no evidence she'd ever been there except for a small water stain on the passenger seat that could have been anything. They found the Buick right where I'd marked it, but it was empty. No briefcase, no medical records, no sign of Pearl Caffrey at all. The notebook and phone I'd taken were gone too, though I swear I never took them out of my pocket. The cops took my statement, looked at me like I was drunk or crazy or both, and eventually let me go with a warning about making false reports. I drove the rest of my route in silence, delivered my empty drums, and took a week off. Spent it researching Pearl Caffrey, looking for any trace of her online. Found an obituary eventually, dated 3 days before I found that Buick. Said she died in a car accident outside Memphis, body burned beyond recognition. But I know what I saw that night on Interstate 65. I know Pearl Caffrey died trying to expose something that shouldn't exist. And I know Hoyt Maddox is still out there, looking for anyone else who might have seen his medical records. Sometimes when I'm driving late at night and I see an abandoned car on the shoulder, I think about stopping. Think about Pearl and her desperate documentation, her fear recorded on that cracked phone screen. But I don't stop anymore. I keep driving and try not to look in my mirrors too long, because sometimes, just for a second, I see a shape back there. Too tall, moving wrong, following at exactly the same speed I'm going. Waiting for me to pull over, waiting for me to be the kind of man who helps strangers in the dark, the kind of man who stops for abandoned cars on empty highways, the kind who should know better by now but still feels that pull of conscience, that human need to help. That's what got Pearl Caffrey killed, and that's what nearly got me too. I changed my routes after that, stopped running Interstate 65 altogether. But word gets around in trucking circles. Other drivers have seen the Buick, always in different places, always with the door open and hazards blinking, always empty by the time anyone gets close enough to check. And sometimes they talk about seeing someone in their passenger seat afterward, just for a moment, wearing hospital scrubs and trying to say something important. But when they look again, there's nothing there but a small water stain that could be anything at all. Last week, a driver named Carlos told me he found a briefcase on the side of Interstate 40, real leather with gold clasps. Said it was full of medical records for someone named Pearl Caffrey. Said there were x-rays inside showing things that didn't make sense. Extra bones, organs in the wrong places, shadows where there should be empty space. I told him to leave it where he found it, to drive away, and forget he ever saw it. But Carlos is the kind of man who stops for abandoned cars, the kind who thinks he's helping. He hasn't answered his phone in 3 days. His rig was found yesterday on a dark stretch of highway near the Tennessee border. Doors open, engine still running, no sign of Carlos anywhere. But there was a water stain on the passenger seat, small and circular, like someone had been sitting there recently. The cops are calling it another missing person case, another trucker who probably wandered off into the woods. They don't want to hear about Pearl Caffrey or Hoyt Maddox or the things that shouldn't exist inside human bodies. But I know the truth. I know what happens to people who find those medical records, who see what Pearl saw in those x-rays and surgical photos. Hoyt Maddox finds them, all of them, and makes sure they can't tell anyone else about the extra parts, the impossible organs, the things growing inside him that medicine can't explain. He's patient, methodical, and he never stops looking for the evidence Pearl tried to save. Sometimes I wonder if I'm on his list too, if he knows I saw those files even briefly, if he's just waiting for the right dark highway to finish what he started. I keep driving though, because that's what I do, but I stick to well-lit routes now, busy interstates with plenty of traffic. And I never, ever stop for abandoned cars anymore, no matter how new they look or how recently someone left them. Because somewhere out there, Hoyt Maddox is still hunting for his medical records, still trying to erase the evidence of what he really is. And Pearl Caffrey is still trying to warn people, appearing in passenger seats and leaving water stains, desperate to tell her story to anyone who will listen. The thing is, I don't think she's a ghost. I think she's something else. Something Hoyt made her into when he caught up with her that night. Something that can only exist for moments at a time. Just long enough to try to warn the next person who might help. But nobody listens to dead women in hospital scrubs, and nobody believes truckers who talk about bodies that disappear and men with too many joints. So the cycle continues. The Buick appears on different highways and people keep stopping to help. I saw it again last night, parked on an off-ramp near Bowling Green. Same Tennessee plates, same door hanging open, same weak hazard lights blinking in the darkness. I slowed down, almost stopped. Felt that old pull of conscience telling me to check if someone needed help. But then I saw him in my mirrors, standing at the edge of the trees, tall and wrong and patient, waiting to see what I would do. I pressed the accelerator and kept driving, left the Buick and its mysteries for someone else to find, because that's the thing about highways at night. They're full of abandoned things, cars and people and secrets that should stay buried. And sometimes the kindest thing you can do is keep driving, leave the good Samaritan impulse for daylight and populated places. Pearl Caffrey learned that too late, and Carlos probably has too. But I'm still driving, still hauling loads through the darkness, still trying not to think about what's following me just outside the reach of my mirrors. The dreams are the worst part. I see Pearl trying to speak, mouth moving, but no sound coming out, holding up x-rays that show impossible things growing inside human bodies. And behind her, always behind her, Hoyt Maddox with his too many joints and his patience of a predator. In the dreams, he tells me it's just a matter of time before I stop for another abandoned car, before my conscience overrides my fear. And maybe he's right. Maybe that's why Pearl keeps appearing in passenger seats, trying to warn people like me who can't quite shake the need to help. But for now, I keep driving. Empty chemical drums to Louisville, full loads back to Nashville. Always on the bright highways, always with other traffic nearby. And when I see abandoned cars on dark shoulders, I remember Pearl Caffrey and her briefcase full of impossible medical records. I remember Hoyt Maddox and his terrible articulated walk. And I keep my foot on the accelerator, eyes forward, trying not to notice the shapes that follow just outside the range of my mirrors, waiting for the night when I finally stop to help. 3 weeks after Carlos disappeared, I got a call from his wife Maria. She was crying, could barely get the words out. Said they found Carlos wandering on a back road in Arkansas, 100 miles from where his truck was abandoned. He was alive, but wrong. Kept talking about medical files and someone named Pearl. The doctors said he'd had some kind of breakdown, maybe drugs, maybe a stroke. But Maria said when she visited him, he grabbed her arm hard enough to leave bruises and whispered that Hoyt was still looking, still cleaning up loose ends. I went to see Carlos myself the next week. The psychiatric ward was one of those old buildings that felt heavy with history, all long corridors and locked doors. Carlos was in a room at the end of the hall, sitting in a chair by the window, staring at nothing. When he saw me, his eyes focused for just a moment. "You were right," he said. "Should have kept driving." "But she was so scared, Elwood. In the video, she was so scared." I asked him what video, but he just shook his head and went back to staring at nothing. The nurse told me he'd been like that since they brought him in. Sometimes lucid, sometimes gone. Always talking about videos and medical records that didn't exist. They'd found nothing on him when he was picked up, no phone, no wallet, nothing but the clothes on his back. And those clothes, the nurse mentioned quietly, had been covered in some kind of black substance that the lab couldn't identify. Oil, maybe, but wrong somehow. It had stained his skin too, left marks that wouldn't wash off no matter what they tried. I left that hospital knowing Carlos had found more than just Pearl's briefcase. He'd found her phone too, seen whatever else she'd recorded, whatever proof she'd tried to save. And Hoyt had found him. Done something to him that left him broken but alive. A warning maybe, or just cruel efficiency. Leave them alive but useless, unable to tell anyone what they'd seen in any way that would be believed. That night I pulled into a rest stop just outside Memphis, needed coffee and a bathroom break. The lot was mostly empty, just a few cars and another rig parked at the far end. I was walking back to my truck when I saw it. A briefcase sitting on the hood of a Honda, leather with gold clasps, exactly like the one I'd found in Pearl's Buick. My hands were shaking as I approached it, every instinct screaming at me to walk away. But I had to know. Had to see what Pearl had died trying to protect, what had broken Carlos's mind. The briefcase was unlocked, and inside were the medical files, just like before. But this time I really looked at the x-rays, held them up to the parking lot lights. What I saw there still visits me in nightmares. The skeletal structure was wrong. Too many ribs, joints that bent in impossible directions, and in the chest cavity where organs should be, there were shapes that didn't belong in any anatomy textbook. Things that looked almost like other smaller skeletons, nested inside the larger one like Russian dolls made of bone. There were surgical photos too, glossy prints that showed things I can't adequately describe, organs that pulsed with their own heartbeat, tissue that had characteristics of both plant and animal, blood that was too dark and moved too slow. The notes in the margins were in Pearl's handwriting, urgent and increasingly frantic. "This isn't human," one said. "CDC must be notified," said another, and at the bottom of the last page, underlined 3 times, "He knows I know." A hand fell on my shoulder and I nearly screamed. But it was just another trucker, older guy with a gray beard and worried eyes. "You okay, son?" he asked. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I slammed the briefcase shut, mumbled something about being tired, and started to walk away. But he called after me. "Hey, that yours?" pointing at the briefcase. I shook my head, kept walking. "Weird," he said. "Could have sworn I saw you put it there." I turned around and the briefcase was gone. The Honda was gone. The old trucker was gone. I was standing alone in an empty rest stop. No other vehicles in sight. No lights except my own rig's parking lamps. The air felt thick, charged, like the moment before lightning strikes. And then I heard that whistle, that same wrong tune I'd heard the night I found Pearl in my cab. It was coming from everywhere and nowhere, surrounding me like fog. I ran for my truck, fumbled with the keys, got inside and locked the doors. The whistling stopped abruptly, replaced by silence so complete it felt like pressure in my ears. Then the CB crackled to life, though I hadn't turned it on. "You're persistent," Hoyt's voice said through the static. Most people stop looking after the first warning. "But you keep seeking, keep searching, keep finding things that were meant to stay lost." "I'm not looking for anything," I said to the empty cab. "I just want to be left alone." The CB crackled again, and this time the voice was different, lighter, female. Pearl's voice. "He can't let you go," she said. "You've seen too much. We've all seen too much. But maybe that's the point. Maybe someone needs to see, needs to remember, needs to know the truth, even if they can't tell it." The radio went dead. I sat there until dawn, afraid to drive, afraid to stay still. When the sun finally came up, the rest stop was full of cars again, families stopping for breakfast, other truckers checking their loads. Normal world reasserting itself like the night had been a dream. But I knew better. I'd seen the x-rays, the surgical photos, the evidence of something wearing a human shape but being something else entirely. I still drive, still haul loads through the night, but I've learned to live with the knowledge that Hoyt Maddox is out there, patient and eternal, cleaning up after himself. And Pearl Caffrey is out there too, in her own way, leaving breadcrumbs for people like me and Carlos, hoping someone will eventually put the pieces together in a way that matters. But I don't think that's possible. Some truths are too big, too strange, too dangerous to ever be properly told. The other night, I was fueling up at a truck stop near Chattanooga when a young driver approached me. Kid couldn't have been more than 25, fresh-faced and eager. He'd heard stories, he said, about abandoned cars and mysterious briefcases, about a trucker named Elwood who'd seen something impossible. He wanted to know if the stories were true. I looked at him, this kid with his whole driving career ahead of him, and I lied. Told him it was all truck stop folklore, stories drivers tell to pass the time on long hauls. But as he walked away, I saw Pearl in my passenger seat again, just for a moment. She was holding up an x-ray, pointing at something in the chest cavity, something that shouldn't exist. And in my mirrors, far back in the shadows beyond the fuel island lights, I could see Hoyt watching, waiting, making sure I kept my mouth shut about the things that grow inside him, the extra parts that make him something other than human. The truth is, some loads are too heavy to carry, even for those of us who make our living hauling weight from one place to another. Pearl tried to carry the truth, and it killed her. Carlos tried, and it broke his mind. And me? I carried just enough to know I should keep driving, keep quiet, and never, ever stop for abandoned cars on dark highways. Because Hoyt Maddox is still out there, still cleaning up, still making sure his medical records stay destroyed. But sometimes, late at night when I'm alone on some empty stretch of interstate, I think about those x-rays. I think about what Pearl discovered in that operating room, what she felt compelled to document and report. And I wonder if there are others like Hoyt, walking around in human shapes, their impossible anatomies hidden under normal clothes and pleasant smiles. I wonder if Pearl's discovery was just the tip of something much larger, much older, much more dangerous than any of us realize. Last month, I heard about another trucker who found a briefcase. Different highway, different state, but the same leather case with gold clasps. He opened it, saw what was inside, and had the good sense to call the CDC directly. They told him it was a hoax, that no such medical records existed, that Pearl Caffrey had never worked at Baptist General. But 2 days later, his rig was found abandoned on a dark stretch of road, doors open, engine running. They found him a week later, walking along a highway 200 miles away, talking about extra organs and impossible bones. The cycle continues. The briefcase appears, someone finds it, someone disappears or goes mad, and Hoyt keeps cleaning up the evidence. And Pearl keeps trying to warn us, appearing in passenger seats, leaving water stains, desperate for someone to understand what she discovered. But understanding might be worse than ignorance. Because once you know what's out there, what's walking among us in human disguise, you can never unknow it. So, I keep driving. I stick to my routes, deliver my loads, and try not to think about what I've learned. But every time I see an abandoned car on the shoulder, every time hazard lights blink in the darkness, I remember that night on Interstate 65. I remember Pearl Caffrey and her desperate attempt to document the impossible. I remember Hoyt Maddox and his terrible patience, and I keep my foot on the accelerator, eyes forward, trying to forget that somewhere out there, things that aren't quite human are walking around in bodies that don't match their X-rays, leaving briefcases on highways for curious truckers to find, perpetuating a cycle of discovery and disappearance that never seems to end. The worst part is knowing that I'm part of it now, part of Hoyt's cleanup routine, part of Pearl's warning system, part of a story that no one will ever fully believe. Sometimes I wonder if that's the real horror, not the impossible anatomy or the extra organs, but the fact that the truth is out there, documented and real, and no one who sees it ever lives to tell it in a way that matters. We just become another missing trucker, another psychiatric patient, another water stain on a passenger seat, another link in a chain that stretches back to that operating room where Pearl Caffrey first saw what was growing inside Hoyt Maddox. I've started leaving notes of my own now, hidden in rest stops and truck stops, tucked into places where only drivers would look. Simple warnings: don't stop for abandoned cars, don't open leather briefcases, don't watch the videos. I don't know if anyone reads them, if anyone takes them seriously. But maybe that's enough. Maybe, if enough of us know to keep driving, to resist that urge to help, Pearl can finally rest and Hoyt can stop his endless cleaning. But I doubt it. Because every night there are new drivers on the road, young and eager and helpful. The kind who stop for abandoned cars and investigate mysterious briefcases. The kind who think they're helping when they're really just becoming part of the pattern, another victim of curiosity and good intentions. And Hoyt Maddox keeps hunting for his medical records, patient and methodical and eternal, making sure no one ever learns what Pearl Caffrey discovered in that operating room. Sometimes, in my darkest moments, I think about finding Hoyt myself, confronting him, demanding answers, trying to understand what he is and why he exists. But then I remember Carlos in that psychiatric ward, broken and babbling about videos that don't exist. I remember Pearl appearing in my passenger seat, desperate and silent and gone. And I keep driving because that's all any of us can do when faced with truths too large and strange to comprehend. The road stretches on, endless and dark, full of abandoned cars and leather briefcases, and things that shouldn't exist but do. And I'm just another trucker, hauling loads through the night, trying not to think about what's following me in the mirrors, what's waiting on the shoulder, what's growing inside bodies that look human but aren't. The highway doesn't care about our fears or our discoveries. It just goes on, and so do we, carrying our loads and our secrets, never stopping for abandoned cars, never opening briefcases, never watching the videos that show the truth about what's out there in the darkness, wearing human faces and hunting for evidence of their own impossible existence. The rest stops at 40 miles outside of Amarillo. one of those old concrete structures the state built in the 70s and forgot about. Restrooms that reeked of industrial disinfectant, vending machines that hadn't been restocked since Obama's first term, and parking spaces cracked like dried mud after rain. I'd been driving for 14 hours straight, hauling a load of industrial refrigeration units from Dallas to Denver, and my eyes were starting to play tricks on me. You know that feeling when the white lines start to blur and every shadow looks like a deer about to jump into your path? That's when you need to stop, regulations or no regulations. I pulled the Peterbilt into the back section where the big rigs park, killed the engine, and sat there for a moment in the sudden silence. 3 other trucks were already there, all dark, drivers probably sleeping. The place was lit by those harsh sodium lights that turn everything orange and throw long shadows that don't quite match up with where they should be. I grabbed my thermos, what was left of my coffee from the last stop, and climbed down from the cab. My knees popped like firecrackers. Getting old in this business happens fast, even when you're only 38 like me. The night air hit different out here, thin and dry, carrying the smell of diesel and something else, something like metal left in the sun too long. I walked toward the restroom, boots, crunching on broken glass some fool had left in the parking lot, when I noticed him. A man sitting on the concrete barrier between the truck parking and the car area, just sitting there in the dark, wearing what looked like an old military surplus jacket. Not unusual necessarily, lots of homeless folks hang around rest stops, but something about his posture was wrong. Too straight, too still, like he was waiting for something specific. I nodded at him as I passed, trucker courtesy even to strangers, and he smiled. Not a normal smile, but one that stretched too wide, showed too many teeth. "Evening, driver," he said, and his voice had this quality to it, like it was coming from somewhere deeper than his throat. "You look tired. Been pushing hard?" I told him, yeah, been on the road since dawn. He nodded slowly, deliberately, like my answer confirmed something he already knew. "That's dedication," he said. "Not many left who understand dedication." "You play cards?" The question came out of nowhere, threw me off balance. I told him no, I needed to use the facilities and get some sleep. But he stood up, unfolding from that barrier like he had extra joints, and I realized he was tall, maybe 6'5", maybe more. "Just one hand," he said. "I've got a proposition for you. Something that might interest a dedicated man like yourself." He pulled out a deck of cards from his jacket pocket, worn and yellowed with age, held together with a rubber band. I should have walked away. Every instinct I'd developed in 20 years of trucking was screaming at me to get back in my cab, lock the doors, and drive until this place was a memory. But there was something about him, something that made it hard to refuse. Not threatening exactly, but compelling in a way I couldn't define. Like when you see an accident on the highway and you know you shouldn't look, but you can't help yourself. "What kind of proposition?" I asked, and immediately wished I hadn't. He smiled wider, if that was possible, and gestured toward a picnic table near the edge of the lot, barely visible in the shadows between lights. "A game," he said. "One hand a poker. If you win, I'll tell you something that will change your life." "If I win." He paused, tilted his head like he was listening to something I couldn't hear. "If I win, you do me a small favor. Nothing illegal, nothing immoral, just a small task." I laughed, but it came out nervous, forced. Told him I didn't play games with strangers in dark rest stops. But he was already walking toward the table, shuffling those old cards with hands that moved too smooth, too practiced. "Silas Hargis," he said over his shoulder. "Not a stranger anymore. And you're Doyle Pennington, out of Fort Worth, running refrigeration units to Denver. Wife named Catherine. daughter named Sophie, been driving for Brennan Transport for 6 years. That stopped me cold. I hadn't told him my name, hadn't mentioned my cargo or destination. My truck had the company logo, sure, but the rest? No way he could know that from just looking at me. How did you... But he was already sitting at the picnic table, dealing cards onto the weathered wood. 5 cards, face down in front of where I would sit, 5 in front of him. I know things, Silas said simply. It's a gift, or a curse, depending on your perspective. Sit, and despite every rational thought in my head, I sat. The bench was cold through my jeans, and I could feel the chill creeping up my spine. He pushed my cards toward me. Look at them. No exchanges, no draws, just what fate dealt you. I picked up the cards with hands that weren't quite steady. 4 aces and a king. An impossible hand. The kind you might see once in a lifetime if you played every day. I looked up at him, and he was watching me with eyes that reflected the orange light in a way that wasn't quite right. Interesting, he said. Fate favors you tonight. But let's see what it gave me. He flipped his cards one by one, deliberate and slow. 4 kings and an ace. He'd beaten me with an even more impossible hand. How unfortunate, he said. But his tone suggested it was anything but. Seems you owe me that favor. I started to stand, told him the game was obviously rigged, but my legs wouldn't cooperate. They felt heavy, rooted to that bench like they'd grown into the concrete. The favor is simple, Silas continued, gathering the cards with those too smooth movements. There's another driver coming through here tonight, about an hour from now. Woman driving a white Freightliner, hauling produce from California. Fern Talbot is her name. You're going to tell her about me. Tell her Silas Hargis is waiting. Tell her I have something that belongs to her. What belongs to her, I managed to ask, though my mouth felt dry as West Texas dirt. He stood up, towering over me, and the shadow he cast didn't match his shape. It was longer, had angles that weren't there in his actual form. That's between me and Miss Talbot, he said, but you'll tell her. You'll wait here until she arrives and you'll deliver my message. After that, you're free to go. He walked away then, not toward the parking lot or the restroom or anywhere that made sense. He walked toward the fence at the edge of the rest stop property and just kept walking, through it, like it wasn't there. I sat at that picnic table for 5 minutes, 10, trying to convince my legs to work, trying to process what had just happened. Finally, the feeling came back, pins and needles at first, then normal sensation. I should have run to my truck, driven away fast as the rig would go. But something made me stay. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was fear of what would happen if I didn't deliver his message. Or maybe it was something else. Something he'd done when we shook hands that I was only now starting to understand. A coldness that had spread from his touch up my arm and settled somewhere behind my ribs. A feeling that he would know if I didn't do what he asked. 45 minutes later, a white Freightliner pulled into the rest stop. It parked 3 spaces down from my rig, and a woman climbed out. Middle-aged, graying hair pulled back in a ponytail, wearing worn jeans and a flannel shirt despite the heat. She looked tired, the kind of bone-deep exhaustion that comes from too many years on the road. I approached her before she could head to the restroom. "Fern Talbot?" I asked, and she stopped, turned to look at me with suspicious eyes. "Who's asking?" she said, and her hand moved to her pocket where I could see the outline of something, maybe a knife, maybe pepper spray. I held up my hands, showed her I meant no harm. "I'm supposed to give you a message," I said. "From someone named Silas Hargis. He said to tell you he's waiting." Said he has something that belongs to you." The change in her face was immediate and terrible. The color drained away like someone had pulled a plug, and her eyes went wide with something beyond fear. "No," she said, so quiet I almost didn't hear it. "No, he's dead. I saw him die, watched the truck hit him outside Barstow 5 years ago. Saw them load his body into the ambulance." "Well, he looked pretty alive to me," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Tall guy, military jacket, played cards with me about an hour ago." She grabbed my arm then, fingers digging in hard enough to hurt. "Did you touch him?" she asked. "Did you shake hands? Did he touch you at all?" I nodded, and she let go like my arm was on fire. "You poor bastard," she said. "You're marked now. He can find you anywhere." "What are you talking about?" "Who is this guy?" But Fern was already backing toward her truck, keys out, hands shaking so bad she dropped them twice. "He's not a guy," she said. "Not anymore." Maybe never was. "He collects things, people who break promises, who owe debts. I thought I'd paid mine, thought the accident." She stopped, looked around the rest stop like she expected him to materialize from the shadows. "What did you owe him?" I asked, but she was already climbing into her cab. "Get out of here," she said. "Drive until you can't drive anymore, then keep going. Don't stop at rest stops, don't stop for anything. Maybe if you're lucky, he'll forget about you." She started the engine, but before she could pull away, something happened to the lights. All the sodium lamps flickered once, twice, then went out completely. The only illumination came from our headlights and the stars, more stars than I'd ever seen, like the light pollution had been erased for miles around. And in that darkness, Silas Hargis stood in the middle of the parking lot, still wearing that military jacket, still smiling that too-wide smile. "Hello, Fern," he said, and his voice carried like he was using a PA system. "It's been a long time. You look well for someone who killed me." Fern's engine revved, and for a second I thought she was going to run him down. But the truck didn't move, wheels spinning in place like the parking lot had turned to ice. "That's not very polite," Silas said, walking toward us with steps that covered too much ground. "And after I've been so patient..." He stopped at her driver's side door, reached up, and tapped on the window with one finger. The glass cracked in a spiderweb pattern from that single touch. "You made a deal," he said. "Your son's life for a decade of service. You gave me 5 years, then arranged that accident. Very clever, hiring that drunk to run me down. But death isn't quite the escape you thought it would be." Fern was crying now, sobbing really, but she rolled down the cracked window. "I couldn't do it anymore," she said. "The things you made me deliver, the people you made me recruit. It was evil." Silas laughed, a sound like grinding gears. "Evil is a matter of perspective," he said. "You didn't think it was evil when your son was dying of leukemia and I offered you a way to save him. Every deal has a price, Fern. You knew that." He turned to look at me then, and his eyes were black, not dark brown or deep blue, but black like holes in his face. "Doyle here is going to help us settle our account," he said. "Aren't you, Doyle?" I wanted to say no, wanted to run, but that coldness in my chest flared up, and I found myself nodding. "Good," Silas said. "Here's what's going to happen. Fern is going to give you something from her truck. A package she's been carrying for the last 5 years, hiding it, keeping it from me. You're going to take that package and deliver it to an address I'll give you. Do that, and we're all square." "What if I don't?" I managed to ask. Silas smiled wider, and for a moment his face wasn't a face at all, but something else. Something that hurt to look at directly. "Then you join my collection," he said. like all the others who couldn't pay their debts. There's always room for one more driver on my special routes. Fern climbed down from her cab, went to the back of her trailer. She returned with a box, maybe 2 feet square, wrapped in what looked like old canvas and tied with rope. It was heavy when she handed it to me, heavier than it should have been for its size, and warm like it had been sitting in the sun. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." "The address," Silas said, and suddenly I knew it, could see it in my mind clear as a GPS display. A warehouse in Lubbock off Highway 87, Bay Door 7, leave the package and go. Don't look inside, don't ask questions, don't deviate from the route. The coldness in my chest pulsed, and I understood it was his insurance, his way of tracking me, making sure I completed the task. The lights came back on then, harsh and orange, and Silas was gone. Not walking away, not fading, just gone between one blink and the next. Fern collapsed against her truck, sliding down until she was sitting on the dirty asphalt. 5 years I carried that thing, she said. 5 years of it whispering to me, showing me things in dreams. Now it's yours to carry. God help you. I wanted to ask what was in the box, what I was really delivering, but the coldness flared again and the words died in my throat. I loaded the package into my cab, secured it behind the passenger seat where I could keep an eye on it. Fern was still sitting by her truck when I pulled out of the rest stop. I never saw her again, never heard what happened to her after that night. Maybe she drove away, finally free of her debt. Maybe Silas came back for her anyway. The drive to Lubbock was the longest 3 hours of my life. The package sat behind me, and I could feel it there like another passenger, like something alive and waiting. Sometimes I heard sounds from it, soft scratching like fingernails on cardboard. Sometimes what might have been breathing. The radio wouldn't work right, kept picking up stations that shouldn't exist. Voices speaking languages I didn't recognize. Music that hurt to listen to. I stopped once for gas, had to. The tank was running low. The kid at the register looked at me strange, asked if I was feeling all right. I looked in the mirror behind him and understood why. My face was pale, drawn, like I'd aged 10 years in 3 hours, and my eyes had dark circles under them, but not the normal kind from being tired. These were black, like someone had painted them on, and they seemed to move on their own, independent of my blinking. The warehouse in Lubbock was exactly where Silas had shown me, an industrial district that looked abandoned even during what should have been business hours. Bay Door 7 was open, nothing but darkness beyond. I backed the truck up to it, grabbed the package with hands that shook like I had palsy. The moment I stepped into that darkness, I could feel them. Others like Silas, things that wore human shapes but weren't human, hadn't been for a long time, if ever. "Leave it," a voice said from the darkness. Not Silas, someone else, something else. "Your debt is paid." I set the package down and backed out quickly, not turning around, some primitive instinct telling me that showing my back to whatever was in there would be the last mistake I ever made. The bay door rolled down on its own as soon as I was clear, and the coldness in my chest vanished like it had never been there. I drove straight through to Denver, delivered the refrigeration units, then told my dispatcher I was taking time off. A month, maybe more. He argued, said I couldn't just leave them hanging, but I didn't care. I needed to get away from trucks, from highways, from rest stops especially. I went home to Catherine and Sophie, held them like I'd never held them before, tried to forget what I'd seen and felt and carried. But you don't forget something like that. Even now, 2 years later, I still dream about that package. In the dreams, I open it, see what's inside, and I wake up screaming. Catherine says I talk in my sleep now, say things in languages she doesn't recognize, mention names of places that don't exist on any map. And sometimes, when I'm driving my pickup to the store or taking Sophie to school, I see him in the mirror. Silas Hargis, sitting in the back seat, smiling that too-wide smile, reminding me that I'm marked, that I played his game and lost, that there might be other favors to collect down the road. I don't drive trucks anymore. Got a job at a warehouse, loading and unloading, keeping my feet on solid ground. But sometimes I hear about drivers who've gone missing, or who've shown up weeks later with no memory of where they've been, talking about card games at rest stops and packages that need delivering. And I know Silas is still out there, still collecting debts, still playing his games with tired truckers who should know better than to gamble with strangers in the dark. Last month, a driver named Bill came into the warehouse picking up a load. He looked rattled, kept checking over his shoulder, hands shaking as he signed the paperwork. I asked if he was all right, and he looked at me with haunted eyes. "You ever meet a man named Silas Hargis?" he asked. I told him no, lied straight to his face because what else could I do? Tell him the truth, tell him he was marked, that he'd carry that coldness in his chest until he completed whatever favor Silas wanted. "Stay away from rest stops," I told him instead. "Drive straight through when you can." He laughed, bitter and short. "Too late for that," he said. "Way too late." He left with his load, and I heard later that his truck was found abandoned on I-40, doors open, keys in the ignition, no sign of Bill anywhere. They found cards scattered on the driver's seat, 4 aces and a king, an impossible hand that hadn't been quite impossible enough. That's the thing about Silas Hargis and his games. The house always wins, even when you think you've got the best hand possible. He deals the cards, he makes the rules, and he collects his debts one way or another. I was lucky, if you can call it that. I delivered his package, paid my debt with someone else's burden. But Fern was right about one thing. Once you're marked, he can find you anywhere. Sometimes I drive by that rest stop outside Amarillo, can't help myself, like picking at a wound that won't heal. It looks normal during the day, just another tired way station on an endless highway. But at night, when the sodium lights turn everything orange and throw those long shadows, I can see him sometimes. Sitting on that concrete barrier, shuffling his old cards, waiting for the next tired driver who needs to stop, who's pushing too hard, who might be willing to play just one hand. I want to warn them, want to pull over and tell them to keep driving, but the coldness flares up in my chest, a reminder that some debts are never really paid, just deferred. So I keep driving, keep my mouth shut, and try not to think about what was in that package, what's in all the packages that drivers like Fern carry on their routes, hidden in their trailers, whispering in the dark. The truth is, the highways are full of things like Silas Hargis, creatures that feed on debt and desperation, that make deals with people who have nowhere else to turn. They wait at rest stops and truck stops, at way stations and lonely stretches of road, looking for drivers who are tired, scared, desperate enough to play their games. And once you play, once you lose, you become part of their network. Another link in a chain that stretches across every interstate and back road in America. I've started seeing others too, drivers with that same haunted look, that same coldness behind their eyes. We recognize each other, nod in passing, but never speak about what we've seen, what we've done, what we've delivered in the dark. It's a brotherhood of the damned, bound together by impossible card games and packages that shouldn't exist. We're all waiting for the next favor, the next task, the next time Silas or something like him needs a delivery made. Catherine thinks I'm paranoid, says I need therapy, maybe medication. She doesn't understand why I won't take road trips anymore, why I insist we fly everywhere, why I break out in cold sweats when we pass a rest stop. Sophie asks why Daddy doesn't drive trucks anymore, why he seems scared of the highway. I tell her it's because I want to spend more time at home, but she's smart, knows there's more to it than that. The worst part is knowing it's not over. That coldness in my chest isn't gone, just dormant, waiting. Silas Hargis didn't release me, he just put me on hold, filed me away for future use. One day, maybe tomorrow, maybe years from now, I'll feel that coldness flare up again, and I'll know it's time for another favor, another package, another delivery to a dark warehouse where things that human wait to receive what's theirs. And I'll do it because the alternative is worse. I've heard stories about drivers who refused their second favor, who tried to run or hide or fight back. They don't die, not exactly. They become something else, something that serves Silas and his kind more directly. They drive trucks that don't appear on any company register, hauling loads that don't show up on any manifest, making deliveries to addresses that don't exist in our world but do in theirs. There's a whole shadow economy out there, running parallel to the real one, using our highways and our trucks and our drivers to move things that shouldn't be moved. And once you've glimpsed it, once you've been part of it, you can never really leave. You just exist in the space between, marked and waiting, hoping that the next knock on your door isn't Silas Hargis with his old deck of cards and his too-wide smile, ready to deal another impossible hand. I keep thinking about Fern Talbot, wondering if she really got free, or if she's out there somewhere, driving her white Freightliner on routes that don't appear on any map, delivering packages for creatures that used to be human or never were. I think about that package I delivered, what might have been inside, what purpose it served in whatever dark economy Silas operates. And I think about all the other drivers out there tonight, pulling into rest stops, tired and vulnerable, about to meet a tall man in a military jacket who wants to play just one hand of cards. If you're reading this, if you're a driver, take my advice. Don't stop at rest stops at night unless you absolutely have to. If you see a tall man in a military jacket, keep walking. If someone offers to play cards with you, especially if they seem to know things about you they shouldn't know, run. Get in your truck and drive until you can't see that place in your mirrors anymore. Because once you sit down at that table, once you pick up those cards, you're playing a game where the rules aren't what they seem, and the stakes are higher than you can imagine. The house always wins, and Silas Hargis is the house. He's been the house for longer than anyone knows, collecting debts and favors and souls, building his network one desperate driver at a time. And somewhere out there, at a rest stop you haven't reached yet, he's waiting with his deck of impossible cards, ready to make you an offer you can't refuse, ready to add you to his collection of marked drivers who deliver packages in the dark and try to forget what they've become part of. I see him sometimes in my dreams, still sitting at that picnic table, still shuffling those cards with his too smooth hands. In the dreams, I always sit down again, always play another hand, always lose. And when I wake up, that coldness in my chest is a little stronger, a little deeper, like it's growing, like it's becoming something more than just a mark. Maybe that's how it starts, how drivers like me become things like Silas, one cold night and one bad hand at a time. So I wait, and I watch, and I try to pretend that my life is normal, that I'm just another warehouse worker with a wife and daughter and a past I don't talk about. But late at night, when the house is quiet and I can hear the distant sound of trucks on the highway, I remember that rest stop outside Amarillo. I remember Silas Hargis and his impossible cards, Fern Talbot and her terrible burden, and the package that whispered in the dark all the way to Lubbock. And I know that somewhere out there, another driver is pulling into a rest stop, tired and alone, about to meet a stranger who wants to play a friendly game of cards. The cycle continues, the network grows, and Silas Hargis smiles his too wide smile. dealing hands that can't be won, collecting debts that can never really be paid. That's the game. That's always been the game, and once you sit down at that table, you're playing whether you want to or not, for stakes you won't understand until it's far too late to fold. The stretch of Highway 287 through North Texas at 3 in the morning is about as empty as roads get in America. Nothing but mesquite trees and oil derricks, the occasional armadillo that didn't make it across, and miles of asphalt that seems to shimmer even in the darkness. I'd been hauling a load of construction equipment from Oklahoma City down to Houston, making good time on account of the roads being clear and the weather holding steady. 23 years I'd been driving these routes, and I'd gotten pretty good at reading the rhythms of the night, knowing which stretches to push through and which ones to take careful. That's why the lights in my mirror didn't sit right with me from the start. Red and blue, sure, but the pattern was off. Texas DPS runs a specific configuration on their light bars, and after 2 decades of seeing them in your mirrors, you get to know them like you know your own heartbeat. These were close but not quite, like someone had studied them from a distance but missed the details that matter. Still, you don't ignore police lights, not if you want to keep your CDL and your job, so I started easing over to the shoulder. The Peterbilt rumbled to a stop on a particularly dark stretch. No streetlights for miles, just scrub brush and the distant glow of pump jacks working through the night. I kept the engine running, hazards on, and waited. Standard procedure as the officer approaches. You keep your hands visible. You be polite and professional even if you're tired as hell and just want to make your delivery deadline. But this one, he sat back there for a long time, maybe 5 minutes, lights still spinning but no movement from the vehicle. When he finally got out, something was immediately wrong with how he moved. Too casual, like he was walking up to chat with a friend rather than conducting a traffic stop. No hand on his weapon, no defensive positioning, just a leisurely stroll up the passenger side of my truck. He was tall, wearing what looked like a Texas Highway Patrol uniform, but even in the dark I could tell it wasn't quite regulation. The badge was too shiny, caught the light wrong, and the hat sat at an angle that no real trooper would tolerate. He knocked on my passenger door 3 times, deliberate and slow. I leaned over and rolled down the window, and that's when I got my first good look at his face. Clean-shaven, maybe 35, with eyes that were too calm for a night shift traffic stop. Real cops have a certain tension to them out here, always watching for threats, always ready. This guy looked like he was enjoying himself. "Evening, driver," he said, and his accent was all wrong. Not Texas, not Oklahoma, something else, something that sounded practiced but not quite natural. "License and registration, please." I handed them over through the window, watched him study them with a flashlight that looked like it came from a hardware store rather than police supply. "Virgil Boone," he read out loud, like he was tasting the name. "That's a good strong name." Biblical. That should have been my second warning. Real cops don't make small talk about your name during a traffic stop. But I was tired, had been driving for 11 hours straight, and my brain wasn't firing on all cylinders. "Is there a problem, officer?" I asked, trying to see his name tag, but it was conveniently obscured by the angle he was standing. "Oh, there's definitely a problem," he said, and smiled in a way that made my skin crawl. "But not with you, Mr. Boone. Not yet, anyway. I need you to step out of the vehicle and come with me to my car. We need to discuss something important." Every instinct I had was screaming, "No. You don't leave your truck on a dark highway for any reason, especially not when something feels this wrong." "I'd rather stay here, officer," I said carefully. "If there's an issue with my paperwork or my load—" His smile widened, and he pulled out what looked like a service weapon, but like everything else about him, it was slightly off. Too clean, too new, like a replica that had never seen actual duty. "I'm going to have to insist, Mr. Boone. This is a matter of national security." He said it so seriously that for a second I almost laughed, but the gun was real enough looking, and I had a wife and 2 kids back in Amarillo who needed me to come home alive. I climbed down from the cab, slow and careful, hands visible the whole time. The ground felt unstable under my boots, like the whole world had tilted slightly off its axis. He gestured toward the patrol car with the gun, and I walked ahead of him, trying to get a look at the vehicle. It was a Crown Victoria, right make and model for Texas DPS, but the unit number on the side was wrong. Texas runs 4 digits. This had 5, and they started with a letter that didn't match any district I knew. "Get in the back," he said, opening the rear door. The inside looked wrong too clean, no prisoner partition, no radio equipment that I could see. But the gun was still pointed at me, and out here, miles from anywhere, nobody would hear a shot. I got in, and he closed the door behind me. The locks engaged with a sound that was too final, too heavy for a standard police cruiser. He got in the front, set the gun on the passenger seat where I could see it but couldn't reach it, and turned to face me through where the partition should have been. "Now then, Mr. Boone, let me explain what's happening here. In about 10 minutes, a real Texas Highway Patrol unit is going to come down this road. Deputy Nolan Evers, good man, family guy like yourself. He's going to find something on the highway that's going to change his life, end his career, possibly land him in federal prison." "I don't understand," I said, though I was beginning to, and the understanding was making me sick. He pulled out a plastic bag from under his seat, heavy with something wrapped in brown paper. "This is going to be in Deputy Evers' vehicle when Internal Affairs searches it tomorrow. 2 kilos of pure methamphetamine, street value about $60,000. Tragic, really, how a good cop can go bad. The stress of the job, the long hours, the temptation of easy money." "You're setting him up," I said, and he nodded like I was a bright student who'd just solved a math problem. "Very good, Mr. Boone. But here's where it gets interesting. You're going to help me do it." I started to protest, but he held up a hand. "Not by choice, I understand. But you see, your truck is going to break down in about 5 minutes. Catastrophic engine failure, very unfortunate. Deputy Evers is going to stop to help because that's the kind of man he is. And while he's helping you, checking under your hood, calling for a tow truck, I'm going to put this package in his vehicle." "Why?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. Why frame an innocent cop? He laughed, but there was no humor in it, just a cold amusement that made the temperature in the car seem to drop. "Innocent is a relative term, Mr. Boone. Deputy Evers has been investigating something he shouldn't be investigating. Asking questions about shipments coming through this corridor, trucks that don't appear on any manifest, cargo that exists in paperwork but never in reality. He's getting close to understanding something that needs to remain hidden." He reached under the seat again, pulled out a small device that looked like a remote control. "This will disable your engine when I press it. Very sophisticated, attaches to your ECM while you were stopped. You'll never find it, and it'll dissolve in about 24 hours, leaving no trace. Your truck dies, you're stranded, Evers stops to help, and I do what needs to be done. You're just an innocent bystander who had bad luck on a dark highway." "I won't do it," I said. But even as I said it, I knew I didn't have a choice. He had the gun, he had me locked in the back of what I now realized was probably a stolen or fake police car, and we were miles from help. "You don't have to do anything," he said. "Just be yourself." act confused, frustrated, grateful when the real cop stops to help. Don't mention me, don't mention this conversation. If you do, well, that package doesn't have to end up in the deputy's car. It could end up in your truck instead. He pressed the button on the device, and even from inside the fake patrol car, I could hear my Peterbilt's engine stutter and die. The lights went out, leaving just the hazards blinking weakly in the darkness. "There we go," he said, satisfied. "Now we wait." He turned off the police lights on his car, pulled forward about a quarter-mile, and parked in a small turnout hidden by mesquite trees. From there, we could see my dead truck, but would be invisible to anyone approaching from either direction. We sat in silence for maybe 7 minutes before I saw headlights approaching from the north. Real police lights this time, the pattern I knew by heart. The patrol car slowed, then pulled in behind my truck. Deputy Nolan Evers got out, and even from a distance I could see he was everything the fake cop had described. Mid-40s, built like someone who took the job seriously, moved with the careful confidence of a veteran officer. He approached my truck cautiously, hand near his weapon but not on it, flashlight sweeping the cab and the surrounding area. "This is your cue, Mr. Boone," the fake officer said, unlocking the rear door. "Walk back to your truck. Act surprised to see him. Tell him it just died on you, no warning. Be grateful for the help. And remember, I'll be watching. I'll know if you try to warn him." He held up the bag of drugs. "This can go in his car or yours." "Your choice." I got out and started walking back toward my truck, legs feeling like they were made of water. The deputy saw me coming. His hand went to his weapon, and I raised my hands immediately. "That's my truck, officer," I called out. "Engine just died on me. I was trying to find a signal to call for help. It wasn't entirely a lie, which made it easier to sell." Deputy Evers relaxed slightly but remained professional. "Where were you, sir?" he asked, and I could see him trying to piece together why I was walking from the wrong direction. "Call of nature," I said, gesturing vaguely at the brush. "Figured I'd be here a while. Might as well take care of business." He nodded, seemed to accept it. "Let's take a look at your engine, see if we can get you back on the road." I popped the hood, and we both leaned in with flashlights. Everything looked normal, no obvious problems, which of course there wouldn't be with whatever electronic device the fake cop had used. "Might be the ECM," Deputy Evers said, his Texas accent real and comfortable. "These newer trucks, everything's run by computer. One glitch and the whole thing shuts down. He straightened up, wiped his hands on his pants. "I'll call you a tow, get you to a shop in Childress. They're good people, won't gouge you too bad." While he was on his radio, I saw movement in my peripheral vision. The fake cop, now dressed in different clothes, just jeans and a dark jacket, was approaching the deputy's vehicle from the blind side. He moved like smoke, silent and smooth, had the rear door open and closed in maybe 3 seconds. The package was in, the trap was set, and Deputy Evers had no idea his life had just been destroyed. The tow truck took an hour to arrive, during which time Deputy Evers stayed with me, sharing coffee from his thermos, talking about his kids, his wife who worked as a nurse in Amarillo. He was a good man, I could tell, the kind of cop you want out there on the dark highways, looking out for people. And I sat there, sick to my stomach, knowing what was waiting for him, what would happen when Internal Affairs got their anonymous tip tomorrow. When the tow truck finally arrived and hooked up my rig, Deputy Evers shook my hand. "You be safe out there, Mr. Boone," he said. "These roads can be dangerous at night. Never know what kind of people you might run into." I wanted to warn him, wanted to scream that he needed to check his vehicle, that he was being set up. But somewhere out there in the darkness, I knew the fake cop was watching. waiting to see if I'd keep my mouth shut. I kept my mouth shut. The tow truck driver hauled me to Childress, where a mechanic found nothing wrong with my truck. "Strangest thing," he said. "Everything checks out fine. Computer's not showing any error codes, nothing. Want me to take a deeper look?" But I told him no, paid for the tow, and got back on the road. The truck started fine, ran perfect, like nothing had ever been wrong with it. 2 days later, I saw the news story. Texas Highway Patrol deputy arrested on drug charges. 2 kilos of methamphetamine found in his patrol vehicle during a routine internal affairs inspection. The article mentioned that Deputy Nolan Evers had been under investigation for possible involvement in drug trafficking along the Highway 287 corridor. His wife was quoted as saying it was impossible, that her husband was being framed, but nobody was listening. The evidence was too damning, too clear-cut. I thought about coming forward, telling what I knew, but who would believe me? A story about a fake cop who somehow disabled my truck remotely, who planted evidence while the real deputy was helping me. It sounded insane even to me, and I'd lived through it. Plus, there was the implied threat. The fake cop knew my name, knew my truck, probably knew where I lived. If I talked, would I be next? Would drugs suddenly appear in my sleeper cab during a DOT inspection? So I kept quiet, kept driving, tried to pretend that night never happened. But it ate at me, knowing an innocent man was sitting in federal prison because I'd been too scared to speak up. I started taking different routes, avoiding Highway 287 altogether, but it didn't help. The guilt followed me like a shadow, made every mile feel like a betrayal of everything I thought I stood for. 3 months later, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. When I answered, the voice was familiar, that same practiced accent that wasn't quite right. "Mr. Boone," the fake cop said, "I wanted to thank you for your cooperation. Deputy Evers has been dealt with, and the corridor is secure again. Shipments can resume without interference." I asked him what shipments. What was so important that he'd destroy a good man's life to protect it? "Some things are bigger than one man's life, Mr. Boone," he said. "Bigger than you, bigger than me, bigger than Deputy Evers. There are operations in motion that require certain highways to remain unexamined, trucks that need to pass without questions, cargo that needs to move without documentation. You've been driving these roads for 23 years. Surely you've noticed the trucks that don't quite belong, the ones that appear at strange hours with no company markings, no DOT numbers." I had noticed them, of course. Every long-haul driver had. Ghost trucks, we called them. Running dark with no logs, no electronic tracking. Nothing to say they ever existed except the brief moment when they passed you on some lonely stretch of highway. We'd always assumed they were running drugs or illegal immigrants, something criminal but comprehensible. But the way he talked about it made it sound like something else, something worse. "What are they carrying?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. He laughed, that same cold sound from that night. "Nothing that concerns you, Mr. Boone, but I will tell you this. Deputy Evers was getting close to intercepting one of those shipments. If he'd seen what was inside, it would have caused problems far beyond a simple drug arrest. National security problems, international incident problems, the kind of problems that end with a lot of people disappearing and nobody asking questions. So, you destroyed his life instead," I said, and the anger in my voice surprised me. "One life against many, Mr. Boone. It's simple mathematics, and he's not dead, just incarcerated. His family will be provided for, though they'll never know where the money comes from. Consider it compensation for his unwitting sacrifice." The pragmatism in his voice was chilling. like he was discussing a business transaction rather than a man's destroyed life. "Why tell me this?" I asked. "Why call me at all?" There was a pause, and when he spoke again, his voice had changed, become more serious. "Because you're going to see things, Mr. Boone. Now that you know to look, you're going to notice the ghost trucks, the unmarked vehicles, the shipments that don't exist on paper. And when you do, you're going to remember Deputy Evers. Remember what happens to people who look too closely. You're going to keep your eyes on the road and your mouth shut. Consider yourself warned and educated." The line went dead, and I never heard from him again. But he was right about one thing. I did start seeing things. Convoys of unmarked trucks running in perfect formation at 3 a.m., taking exits that led to facilities that didn't appear on any map. Cars with government plates following certain trucks, keeping pace but never pulling them over. Way stations that would suddenly close when certain vehicles approached, reopening the moment they passed. I started keeping a log, not officially, just notes in a composition book I hid in my sleeper cab. Dates, times, descriptions of vehicles, anything unusual I noticed. I told myself I was gathering evidence, that someday I'd have enough to go to someone. FBI maybe, someone above the local corruption. But really, I think I was just trying to make sense of it, to understand what Deputy Evers had died trying to expose. 6 months after that night on Highway 287, I was passing through the same stretch where my truck had supposedly broken down. It was daylight this time, and I saw something that made me pull over. There were fresh tire marks leading off the road into the brush, deep ruts like something heavy had been dragged. I don't know what made me follow them. Maybe guilt, maybe curiosity, maybe just the need to know. About 100 yards into the scrub, hidden behind a rise that made it invisible from the road, was a Crown Victoria. The same one, I was certain, or one exactly like it. It had been burned, torched so thoroughly that barely anything was left but the frame. But in what remained of the trunk I could see bones. Human bones, charred but unmistakably real. I got out of there fast, didn't call it in, didn't tell anyone. But I knew what I'd seen. The fake cop, whoever he really was, had been cleanup himself. Someone higher up the chain had decided he was a liability, knew too much, had outlived his usefulness. That's when I understood the real truth. It wasn't just about the ghost trucks or the secret shipments. It was about the system that protected them. Layers upon layers of people like the fake cop. All disposable, all expendable, all working to keep something hidden. And Deputy Evers hadn't just been investigating drug trafficking. He'd stumbled onto something much bigger, much darker, something that required an entire infrastructure of lies and violence to protect. I thought about his family, his wife the nurse, his kids growing up thinking their father was a corrupt cop who'd betrayed his badge for drug money. The real betrayal was mine, sitting in that fake patrol car, walking back to my truck, playing my part in the frame-up because I was too scared to fight back. Every time I drive past that stretch of Highway 287, I think about stopping, telling someone, anyone, what really happened that night. But then I remember the bones in the burned car, remember the ghost trucks that still run their secret routes, and I keep driving. The truth is, there are things happening on America's highways that most people can't imagine. Not just drug running or human trafficking, but something else. Something that requires the destruction of good cops and the cooperation of scared truckers. I've never found out what's really in those unmarked trucks. What cargo is so sensitive that it requires this level of protection, this willingness to destroy lives. Part of me doesn't want to know. Deputy Nolan Evers is still in federal prison. will be for another 15 years if he serves his full sentence. I've thought about visiting him, telling him the truth, but what good would it do? No one would believe him if he repeated my story. It would just sound like the desperate lies of a convicted, corrupt cop. So he sits in his cell, knowing he's innocent but unable to prove it, while I drive these highways, free but carrying the weight of what I know, what I didn't do. Sometimes, late at night on empty stretches of road, I see vehicles that might be unmarked police cars in my mirrors. The lights never come on. They never pull me over, but they follow for a while, keeping pace, reminding me that I'm still being watched, that my cooperation that night bought me continued surveillance rather than freedom. I'm a part of the system now, whether I wanted to be or not, complicit in whatever secret commerce flows through these dark highways. Last week I picked up a load in Dallas, heading for Denver, same route I've run 100 times. But at the shipping office, the manager pulled me aside. "There's been a route change," he said, handing me paperwork that directed me away from Highway 287, adding 50 miles to the trip. "Department of Transportation recommendation," he explained, but something in his eyes said he knew more than he was saying. "Safer route," they said. I took the new route, didn't ask questions, didn't protest the extra time and fuel, because I understood the real message. Stay away from Highway 287. Don't go back to where it happened. Some people somewhere had decided I'd been getting too close again, thinking too much about that night. The warning was clear, even if it came disguised as a routine route change. I'm 51 years old now, got maybe another 10 years of driving in me if my back holds out. I'll spend those years staying away from Highway 287, keeping my eyes forward instead of checking my mirrors for ghost trucks, pretending I never met a fake cop named Clint Harwood or helped frame a real one named Nolan Evers. But the guilt rides with me, a permanent passenger in my cab, reminding me that I'm not just a trucker anymore. I'm a co-conspirator in something I don't understand. A small cog in a machine that grinds up good men and spits out convenient lies. The highway stretches on, endless and dark, full of secrets that move in unmarked trucks and destroy anyone who looks too closely. Deputy Evers looked, and they destroyed him. The fake cop knew too much, and they burned him. And me? I keep driving, keep quiet, keep my head down and my mouth shut, because I've seen what happens to people who don't. That's the real horror of that night on Highway 287. Not what I saw, but what I didn't do, what I can never undo. Somewhere out there, the ghost trucks are still running their routes, carrying their mysterious cargo to destinations that don't officially exist. The system that protects them is still in place, still ready to destroy anyone who threatens their operations. And good cops like Deputy Evers are still out there, investigating, asking questions, not knowing that the system they serve has mechanisms in place to eliminate them if they get too close to the truth. I'll retire someday if I live that long, move somewhere far from any major highway, try to forget what I know. But you don't really retire from something like this. Once you've seen behind the curtain, once you've been part of the machinery that destroys innocent lives to protect dark secrets, you carry that knowledge forever. It changes you, makes you see the world differently, makes you understand that the real criminals aren't always the ones in handcuffs. The fake officer's dead, burned in his fake patrol car, but there are others like him, I'm sure of it. Men and women who appear when needed, who have the right uniforms and the right words, who frame the innocent and protect the guilty, who keep the secret highways secret. They're out there tonight, maybe pulling over another trucker, maybe setting up another good cop, maybe disposing of another loose end. The system continues, the ghost trucks keep running, and Highway 287 remains a dark corridor where innocent men lose their lives and guilty secrets stay buried. That's my story, the one I'll never tell officially, the one that will die with me. Deputy Nolan Evers sits in federal prison for a crime he didn't commit. His family lives with shame that isn't theirs, and I drive on through the darkness, knowing I was part of it, knowing I could have stopped it, knowing I didn't. The highway doesn't judge, doesn't care, just goes on forever, carrying its secrets and its guilt, its ghost trucks and its broken lives through the endless Texas night. The minivan was parked at an angle on the shoulder of Interstate 44, about 30 miles east of Joplin, Missouri. It was one of those newer Honda Odysseys, silver paint catching my headlights as I approached, hazard lights blinking that desperate rhythm that always makes my chest tighten. 28 years of driving truck. You see a lot of breakdowns, a lot of people needing help. Most times it's nothing, just a flat tire or overheated engine. But sometimes, especially at 2 in the morning on a stretch of highway that doesn't see much traffic, it's something else entirely. I was hauling paper products from a mill in Arkansas up to a distribution center in Kansas City. Light load that had my trailer sitting high and catching every gust of wind. The December cold had settled in hard that year, temperatures dropping into the 20s, which is why seeing a family standing outside their vehicle immediately set off my internal alarms. You don't stand outside in that kind of cold unless you have to, especially not with kids, which I could see there were, 2 of them, bundled in winter coats but still visibly shivering. The man was waving his arms as I approached, that universal distress signal of someone who desperately needs help. He looked to be in his 40s, beard going gray, wearing a fleece jacket that wasn't nearly warm enough for the weather. I eased the Kenworth onto the shoulder about 50 feet ahead of them and set the brakes. Grabbed my heavy coat and a flashlight, though I kept my phone in my hand ready to dial 911 if needed. "Thank God you stopped," the man said as I approached, and his voice had that edge of genuine panic that's hard to fake. "We've been here for 2 hours, no cell service, heater's not working, and the kids are freezing." I could see the family clearly now in the dome light from their open door. The wife was in the passenger seat, younger than him by maybe 10 years, pretty in that tired way mothers of young children often are. The kids were in the back, a girl maybe 12, and a boy who couldn't have been more than 8. "What happened?" I asked, keeping my distance but trying to sound friendly. The man, who introduced himself as Ephraim McCord, explained that the engine had just died. No warning, no strange noises, just sudden complete failure. Then the battery seemed to drain immediately after, killing the heater and most of the electronics. "It's like something just sucked all the power out of it," he said. And there was something in his eyes when he said it. A flicker of something that might have been fear or might have been something else. The daughter got out of the van then, and immediately something felt off about her. She was beautiful, unusually so for a girl that young, with long auburn hair and eyes that seemed too knowing. "Ah, I'm Delia," she said, and her voice didn't match her age either, too mature, too composed for a 12-year-old who'd been sitting in a cold car for 2 hours. "Thank you for stopping, Mr. Tuttle." I hadn't told them my name yet. I was sure of it. My truck had the company name on the door, but not my personal name. "How did you know my name?" I asked. And Ephraim stepped between us quickly, putting a hand on his daughter's shoulder. "She must have seen it on your truck somewhere," he said, but his smile was forced. "Kids notice everything, you know how it is." But I knew she hadn't seen it anywhere, because it wasn't displayed anywhere visible. "Listen," Ephraim said, changing the subject with the desperation of someone who needed to control the conversation. "I know this is a huge ask, but could you possibly give us a ride to the next town? Just to somewhere warm where we can call for help? The kids are freezing, and my wife, she's not handling this well." I looked at the wife, who hadn't said a word yet, hadn't even looked at me. She was staring straight ahead through the windshield at nothing, hands folded in her lap like she was in church. "Every rule of the road says you don't let strangers in your cab. Insurance forbids it, common sense forbids it, and 28 years of experience screams against it. But it was 20 degrees outside, and there were kids involved, and what kind of man would I be if I left a family stranded in the cold? "I can call for help on my CB, I offered, trying to find a middle ground. "Get a tow truck out here, maybe a state trooper." "No," Delia said sharply, and both her parents turned to look at her with expressions I couldn't read. "I mean," she continued, softening her tone, "we've already tried that. Dad walked half a mile to try to find signal. Nothing works out here, it's like we're in a dead zone." She stepped closer to me and I noticed she wasn't shivering despite the cold. "Please, Mr. Tuttle, we just need to get somewhere safe." The boy spoke for the first time then, his voice small and scared. "The bad men might come back," he said, and his mother finally moved, reaching back to put a hand over his mouth, but it was too late. "What bad men?" I asked, and the family exchanged looks that told a whole story without words. Ephraim sighed, his shoulders sagging. "We had some trouble at a rest stop about an hour back," he said carefully. "Some guys were hassling us, following us. That's why we were driving so late, trying to get away from them." It was plausible enough, and it added urgency to their situation. If someone was following them, if this breakdown wasn't accidental but sabotage, then leaving them here was even worse than I'd thought. But something still felt wrong. The daughter, Delia, was watching me with those two knowing eyes, and there was something almost predatory in her gaze. Not sexual, nothing like that, but calculating. Like she was measuring me for something. "Please," the wife finally spoke, and her voice was different than I expected. Accented slightly, Eastern European maybe. "We have money. We can pay you. $500 just for a ride to the next town." She pulled out a wallet, showed me cash, crisp hundreds that seemed out of place for a family driving an older minivan. $500 for maybe a 30-minute drive was absurd, and the fact that they were offering it made me more suspicious, not less. But then the boy started crying. Real tears, the kind that come with genuine fear and cold, and my resolve weakened. "All right," I heard myself saying, "but we do this my way. I'm calling it in on the CB first, letting dispatch know I'm transporting a family, and everyone stays where I can see them." They gathered what they needed from the van quickly, 2 backpacks and a small cooler. Delia carried a canvas bag that looked heavy for its size, holding it carefully like it contained something fragile. As we walked to my truck, I noticed she stayed close to me, closer than seemed natural for a young girl with a stranger. The cab of a Kenworth W900 isn't designed for 5 people. I had the sleeper compartment, but that was my private space with my personal belongings. I ended up putting the parents in the passenger seat, him holding her on his lap, while the kids sat on the floor of the cab behind the seats. Not legal, not safe, but better than freezing on the highway. As soon as we were settled, I grabbed the CB to call it in, but Delia put her hand on my arm. "Please don't," she said, and there was something in her touch, a warmth that spread up my arm and made my thoughts go fuzzy. "If you call it in, the bad men might hear. They have radios, too." It made no sense, but I found myself putting the CB handset down, my hand moving without my conscious control. "That's better," Ephraim said, and his voice had changed, lost the desperate edge and become something colder, more controlled. Now, Mr. Tuttle, we need to discuss what's really happening here. The wife turned in the seat to look at me, and her eyes were different now, pupils dilated so wide they looked black. You've been very helpful, she said, accent thicker now. But we need more than just a ride. I tried to shake off the drowsiness, tried to focus. What are you people? I managed to ask, though my tongue felt thick. Delia laughed, a sound too old for her apparent age. We're a family, she said. Just not the kind you're thinking of. Ephraim found me first, saved me from something worse than death. Then we found Magdalena. She gestured to the woman. And finally, little Thomas. We take care of each other, protect each other, feed together. Feed? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. The boy, Thomas, had curled up in the corner, no longer crying, but watching everything with wide, frightened eyes. He seemed as scared of his family as he had been of the supposed bad men. He's new, Ephraim explained, noticing my attention, still adjusting to our way of life. But he'll learn, just like Delia did. The truck was rolling now, though I didn't remember starting to drive. My hands were on the wheel, my foot on the accelerator, but it felt like someone else was controlling them. We were heading east on I-44, but taking an exit I didn't recognize, onto a state road that led north into farmland. Where are we going? I asked, fighting against the fog in my mind. Somewhere private, Delia said. She had moved closer, was practically leaning against me now, and that warmth from her touch was spreading through my whole body. Somewhere we can complete the transaction without being disturbed. Transaction. The word cut through the fog for a moment. What transaction? I'm just giving you a ride. Magdalena laughed, bitter and sad. No, Mr. Tuttle, you're giving us much more than that. You see, we need someone with a commercial vehicle, someone who can transport certain items across state lines without being questioned. Someone with a clean record and a reputation for reliability. She pulled out a folder from one of the backpacks, thick with paperwork. Your record is impeccable. 28 years, no accidents, no violations, no failed drug tests. Perfect. They knew everything about me. My driving record, my routes, probably my home address and family information too. This wasn't a random breakdown, wasn't a family in distress. It was a trap, and I'd walked right into it. You staged the breakdown, I said, pieces clicking together. You were waiting for a trucker to stop.
Not just any trucker, Ephraim corrected. We've been watching you for weeks, Mr. Tuttle. Following your routes, learning your habits. You always stop for families in distress. It's admirable, really, that compassion, but it's also a weakness we could exploit. The road was getting narrower, darker, trees pressing in on both sides. We were miles from the interstate now, deep in Missouri backcountry. What do you want me to transport? I asked, though the spreading warmth was making it hard to care about the answer. Delia opened her canvas bag carefully, revealing what looked like mason jars filled with dark liquid. In the dim cab light, the liquid seemed to move on its own, swirling and pulsing like it was alive. Medicine, she said simply. Very special medicine that certain people will pay enormous amounts for. But I could see it wasn't medicine. The liquid in those jars was wrong in every way, too dark to be blood but moving like it was alive, pressing against the glass like it wanted out. It's exactly what it needs to be, Ephraim said. And you're going to help us deliver it to buyers across the Midwest. Your truck is perfect, above suspicion. You'll make your regular runs, and we'll add our special cargo. You'll be compensated, of course. More money than you could make in 5 years of honest hauling. But then Thomas made a sound, a whimper of pure fear, and it cut through the fog like a blade. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the bruises on his wrists, the hollow look in his eyes. He wasn't part of this family by choice. He was a prisoner, just like I was becoming. "You kidnapped him," I said, and Magdalena's face hardened. "We saved him," she insisted, but her voice lacked conviction. "His parents were going to hurt him, would have killed him eventually. We gave him a new family, a purpose." But Thomas shook his head violently, opened his mouth like he wanted to speak, and Delia turned to look at him with those terrible, knowing eyes. He immediately went silent, curling tighter into his corner. The truck had stopped. We were in a clearing, an old barn visible in the headlights. Other vehicles were parked there, cars and vans with out-of-state plates. People emerged from the barn, moving toward us with purposeful strides. They looked normal enough, could have been farmers or local workers, but something in the way they moved was wrong, too coordinated, like a pack hunting together. "Welcome to the distribution center," Ephraim said, opening his door. "Time to unload your regular cargo and load our special editions." But I wasn't moving, couldn't move. The warmth had turned to paralysis, my body no longer responding to my commands. Delia stayed with me while the others got out, her hand still on my arm, maintaining whatever hold she had on me. "You're probably wondering what I am," she said conversationally, like we were having coffee at a truck stop. "The truth is, I don't really know. Ephraim found me when I was much younger, living in foster care. I could do things, influence people, make them see what I wanted them to see. He taught me to refine it, to use it for the family's benefit. You're going to help us, Mr. Tuttle," she continued. "You don't have a choice. But I want you to understand that we're not monsters. We're survivors, doing what we need to do in a world that would destroy us if it knew we existed." She gestured to the jars in the bag. "That medicine, as we call it, helps people like us, people who are different, who need something extra to maintain their human appearance." Human appearance. The words confirmed what I'd been trying not to think. These weren't people, not entirely. They were something else, something that needed special substances to pass for human. And now they wanted to use my truck, my reputation, to distribute their nightmare fuel across the country. The others were unloading my trailer now, moving the paper products to one of the barns. They worked efficiently, systematically, like they'd done this many times before. How many other truckers had they trapped like this? How many were out there right now, hauling their dark cargo along with legitimate loads, unable to refuse or report what was happening? Thomas suddenly moved, launching himself at the passenger door. He'd been pretending to be more paralyzed than he was, waiting for his chance. He got the door open, tumbled out onto the ground, started running toward the trees. For a moment, hope flared in my chest. If he could escape, maybe he could get help, tell someone what was happening here. But Magdalena was impossibly fast. She didn't run so much as flow across the ground, catching Thomas before he'd made it 20 feet. When she brought him back, he was unconscious, head lolling against her shoulder. "Children," she said sadly. "Always so difficult in the beginning. But he'll learn just as Delia did." Delia. They loaded the jars into hidden compartments in my trailer, spaces I didn't know existed, behind false panels and under the floor. Dozens of them, each pulsing with that dark liquid that hurt to look at directly. When they were done, the trailer looked exactly the same, would pass any inspection unless someone knew exactly where to look. "Your first delivery is in Denver," Ephraim said, handing me a phone I didn't recognize. "The address will be texted to you when you arrive. You'll wait at that location for exactly 10 minutes. Someone will come for the cargo. You don't speak to them, don't look at them directly, just let them take what they came for. Then you continue your regular route as if nothing happened." "And if I don't?" I managed to ask, Delia's control loosening slightly now that the cargo is loaded. If I drive straight to the police? Delia squeezed my arm, and pain shot through my body like electricity. Then we'll know, she said simply. I'm connected to you now, Mr. Tuttle. I'll feel it if you try to betray us, and we'll find you, no matter where you go. But more importantly, we'll find your wife Janet, your son Michael at Colorado State, your daughter Sarah and her new baby in Tulsa. They knew everything, every detail of my life, my family, everyone I cared about. The threat was clear without being stated directly. Cooperate or watch everyone you love suffer. They had me, and we all knew it. Take Thomas with you, Magdalena said suddenly, and Ephraim turned to look at her in surprise. He needs to learn, she said firmly. And Mr. Tuttle needs insurance that we trust him. The boy goes with him to Denver. If the delivery is successful, we'll retrieve him there. So Thomas was loaded into my sleeper compartment, still unconscious but breathing steadily. Delia touched his forehead, and his eyes opened, glassy and unfocused. You're going on a trip with Mr. Tuttle, she told him. You'll be good, won't you? You'll do exactly as he says, and you won't try to run again. Thomas nodded slowly, mechanically, and I realized she had him under the same control she'd had on me. They let us leave then, just like that. No guards, no escort, just me and a kidnapped child and a trailer full of nightmare fuel heading back to the interstate. The phone they'd given me was active, showing a GPS tracker that I knew was monitoring our every move. Delia's warmth still pulsed in my arm where she'd touched me, a reminder that I was never really alone. Thomas sat in the passenger seat, staring straight ahead. Whatever Delia had done to him was wearing off slowly, and I could see awareness returning to his eyes. When he finally spoke, his voice was small and broken. They killed my parents, he said. Made it look like a car accident. Then they took me, said I was special, that I had potential. But I'm not special. I'm just a kid they stole. How long? I asked, keeping my eyes on the road. How long have they had you? He thought about it, and I could see him struggling to remember. 3 weeks, I think. Maybe a month. Time is weird with them. Sometimes a day feels like a year. Sometimes a week passes in what seems like minutes. We drove in silence for a while, the highway empty except for the occasional long hauler heading the opposite direction. The phone buzzed with coordinates, the delivery location in Denver, a warehouse in an industrial district, the kind of place that wouldn't draw attention at any hour. What happens if we don't go? Thomas asked, reading my thoughts. They hurt my family, I said simply. And probably you, too. He nodded, unsurprised. They're not really a family, he said. They're parasites, using people like us to survive. Those jars, that liquid, it's extracted from people like me. People with certain genetic markers that make us compatible with their needs. They farm us, basically, keep us alive to harvest what they need. The horror of it was too much to process. They weren't just smuggling some mysterious substance. They were trafficking in human essence, something extracted from kidnapped children like Thomas. And I was now part of it, willingly or not, transporting their harvest to others of their kind. The Denver skyline appeared in the distance, mountains behind it painted purple by the approaching dawn. The phone buzzed again, more specific directions now. I followed them mechanically, my mind racing through possibilities. Could I signal someone? Leave evidence? But Delia's warmth pulsed in my arm, reminding me that I was being monitored in ways I didn't understand. The warehouse was exactly what I'd expected. Abandoned looking, no signs, no indication of activity. But as we pulled up to the loading dock, a door opened and 3 figures emerged. They moved wrong, just like Ephraim and Magdalena had, too fluid, too coordinated. They didn't speak, Just opened my trailer and began removing specific jars, obviously knowing
One of them turned to look at us through the cab window, and for a moment its face slipped, showing something underneath that made my mind refuse to process what I was seeing. They took half the jars, leaving the rest for other deliveries. The phone buzzed with new coordinates, new destinations. A network of drops across Colorado, New Mexico, Arizona. Weeks of driving, weeks of being part of this nightmare logistics chain. When the figures retreated back into the warehouse, Thomas grabbed my arm. "We could run now," he said desperately. "They got what they wanted here." We could disappear, but I knew better. Felt the pulse in my arm, saw the tracker on the phone. Thought about Janet sleeping safely in our bed in Amarillo. "They'd find us," I said, "and they'd punish everyone we care about." Thomas slumped back in the seat, defeated. "Then we're trapped," he said, "just like everyone else they've caught." After the last delivery in Las Vegas, the phone buzzed with new instructions. Return to the distribution center in Missouri. Cargo successfully delivered. Thomas would be collected there. The drive back was silent. Thomas had retreated into himself, knowing he was returning to captivity. I wanted to comfort him, to promise I'd find a way to help, but we both knew I was as trapped as he was. When we arrived, Ephraim was pleased. "Excellent work, Mr. Tuttle," he said. "Every delivery completed on schedule, no complications. You're a natural at this." Thomas was led away by Magdalena, not fighting, knowing resistance was useless. He looked back at me once, and in his eyes I saw a plea I couldn't answer. "You'll receive your first payment tomorrow," Ephraim continued. $20,000 deposited in small amounts to avoid suspicion. The next run is in 2 weeks. We'll contact you with pickup instructions. He handed me paperwork for my legitimate cargo, everything in order, no sign of what had really happened. "Oh, and Mr. Tuttle, don't think about going to the authorities. We have people everywhere." Delia approached me one last time, touched my arm again. The warmth spread, but this time it carried images. Janet at the grocery store being watched. Michael at college, walking past a van with dark windows. Sarah holding her baby, unaware of the thing standing outside her window at night. "We're always watching," Delia said softly. "Always ready to act if necessary, but if you cooperate, if you're smart, none of them ever have to know what you've become part of." I left that clearing different than I'd arrived. Still Royce Tuttle, still a truck driver with a spotless record, but now also something else. A collaborator, a smuggler, a cog in a machine that shouldn't exist. 2 weeks later, the phone buzzed again. New pickup location, new cargo, new destinations. I thought about ignoring it, but then I saw the car parked across from Michael's dorm. Saw the van following Sarah to the park. The message was clear. Compliance or consequences. This became my life. Regular runs mixed with special cargo, legitimate shipping interspersed with trafficking in substances that shouldn't exist. The payments kept coming, blood money that ensured my family's comfort while destroying my soul. I saw Thomas twice more over the next year. Each time he looked more hollow, more drained. They were harvesting him regularly now, extracting whatever essence filled those jars. Other drivers started recognizing me at truck stops, giving me knowing looks. We were a fraternity of the damned, all carrying dark cargo, all trapped by threats to our families. We never spoke about it directly, but we knew. You could see it in the eyes, the weight of carrying secrets that would destroy the world if revealed. Last month, I picked up a new kind of cargo. Not jars this time, but actual people. Children, like Thomas, sedated and hidden in compartments I didn't know my trailer had. When I made the delivery, I saw Thomas again. He was helping to unload the children, moving mechanically, dead-eyed. They'd broken him completely, turned him into one of their tools. That's the real horror of it all. Not just that these things exist, not just that they feed on us, but that they've made us complicit in our own victimization. Thousands of drivers, warehouse workers, officials, all trapped in the same web, all helping to maintain the system that preys on humanity. We're livestock that helps manage the farm, too scared for our families to resist, too deep in to escape. So I keep driving. The phone sits on my dashboard, waiting to buzz with instructions. Delia's warmth pulses in my arm, a constant reminder that I'm owned, controlled, part of their network, whether I want to be or not. The highway stretches ahead, endless and dark, full of secrets that move in trucks like mine. And somewhere behind me, Thomas helps prepare new children for harvesting. His humanity stripped away piece by piece until only compliance remains. The rest stop on Highway 169 near the Iowa-Missouri border was one of those forgotten places that the interstate system left behind. Just a gravel lot with a couple of concrete picnic tables and restrooms that hadn't been updated since the Carter administration. At 3 a.m, it was exactly the kind of place where truckers could catch a few hours of sleep without dealing with the bright lights and constant noise of the bigger truck stops. That's why I was there that night, and that's why Merritt Cooley was there too. I'd been hauling grain from Cedar Rapids down to Springfield, running solo like I had for the past 15 years. The Freightliner was getting old, but she still ran smooth, and I knew every sound she made, every vibration that was normal and every one that wasn't. Merritt's rig was parked about 30 feet from mine, a newer Volvo with Tennessee plates. I'd seen him pull in about an hour after me. Watched him do his walk-around inspection with a flashlight before climbing into his sleeper cab. It was the sound that woke me up. Not loud, not violent, just wrong. Like air being sucked out of something, followed by a soft thud. I checked my watch, 3:47 a.m. Through my windshield I could see Merritt's truck, but something was off. The driver's door was open, dome light on, but no sign of him. Maybe he'd needed the restroom, though most of us had bottles for that to avoid walking through rest stops at night. I waited 5 minutes, then 10. The door stayed open, the light stayed on, and Merritt didn't come back. Finally, I grabbed my flashlight and climbed down from my cab. The night was humid, thick with the smell of cornfields and diesel exhaust. Crickets were going strong, but underneath their noise was a silence that felt deliberate, like something was holding its breath. Merritt's cab was empty, keys still in the ignition, logbook open on the seat, fresh coffee in the cup holder still steaming. His phone was there too, screen cracked but working, showing 3 missed calls from someone named Diane. But Merritt himself was gone, like he'd just evaporated. I called out his name, swept my flashlight around the rest stop. Nothing but empty picnic tables and shadows that seemed deeper than they should be. That's when I saw the other truck. It was parked at the far edge of the lot, almost hidden in the trees. Old model, maybe from the 80s, no lights, no plates that I could see. It hadn't been there when I'd pulled in, I was sure of that. But there it sat, dark and silent, like it had always been there. I started walking toward it, then stopped. Something about it was wrong. Fundamentally wrong, in a way that made my skin crawl. I went back to Merritt's truck, grabbed his phone. Should have called 911 right then, but something made me hesitate. What would I say? A trucker was missing from a rest stop? They'd think he wandered into the woods to take a leak, tell me to wait an hour and call back if he didn't return. Instead, I scrolled through his recent calls. The last one he'd made was to someone named Nora Candler, just 20 minutes ago. I hit redial. It rang twice before a woman answered, voice tight with worry. Merritt? Thank God, I was starting to think. She trailed off when I didn't respond immediately. Who is this? She asked, and I could hear fear creeping into her voice. I told her my name, explained I was a trucker parked near Merritt's rig, that he seemed to be missing. Missing, she repeated, and there was something in her voice, recognition maybe, or resignation. From a rest stop on 169? I confirmed, and she was quiet for a long moment. Listen to me very carefully, she finally said. Get back in your truck right now. Lock your doors and drive away. Don't look for him, don't call the police, just leave. Lady, I can't just leave. The man might be hurt, might need help, but she cut me off. He's gone, she said flatly, just like the others. 3 truckers in the last 2 months, all from rest stops along that corridor. The police won't do anything, can't do anything. If you stay there, you'll be next. Others? The word hung in the air like a threat. What do you mean, others? What's happening here? But the line went dead. I tried calling back, but it went straight to voicemail. I stood there in the humid night, Merritt's phone in my hand, trying to process what I'd just heard. 3 truckers missing, all from rest stops like this one. And now, Merritt made 4. Movement caught my eye. Someone was walking around that old truck at the edge of the lot. Tall, thin, moving with an odd gait like their joints bent in too many places. They were looking at the ground, sweeping it with something, erasing tracks maybe. I ducked behind Merritt's trailer, killed my flashlight and watched. The figure completed their circuit of the old truck, then stood perfectly still, facing my direction. I held my breath, pressed myself against the cold metal of the trailer. After what felt like hours but was probably only seconds, the figure turned and walked back toward the trees. Not into them, but toward them. And then they were gone, like they'd stepped through a door I couldn't see. The old truck remained, dark and silent, but somehow it felt more threatening now, like it was waiting for something. I made it back to my truck, locked the doors, and started the engine. Every instinct told me to leave, to follow Nora Candler's advice and get out of there. But I couldn't shake the image of Merritt's open door, his still steaming coffee. What if he was hurt somewhere, needing help? What if those 3 other missing truckers had just needed someone to look for them? I turned on every light my truck had, floods and spots and hazards, turning the rest stop into daylight. Then I got out again, carried the biggest wrench I had, and started searching systematically. The restrooms first. Empty, just cracked tiles and the smell of ancient piss. The picnic area, nothing but cigarette butts and old food wrappers. The tree line, dense and dark, but no signs of disturbance. It was when I circled back toward that old truck that I found it. A wallet lying in the gravel about 10 feet from where the figure had been standing. Not Merritt's, this one was older, worn leather with a trucker's chain. Inside was a CDL for someone named Eugene Vance from Oklahoma, expired 3 years ago. But the photo was recent, couldn't have been more than a few months old. Eugene looked tired in it, hollow-eyed, like someone who'd been sick for a long time. There were other things in the wallet, too. A business card for a company called Transitional Services with no address, just a phone number. A folded piece of paper with dates and locations, all rest stops, all along Highway 169. And a photo of a woman and 2 kids, edges worn from handling. On the back, someone had written, "Remember why," in shaky handwriting. I was so focused on the wallet that I almost missed the sound. Footsteps on gravel, multiple sets, getting closer. I looked up to see 3 figures emerging from behind the old truck. All tall, all moving with that same wrong gait, all focused on me. I backed toward my truck, wrench raised, but they weren't rushing. They moved steadily, deliberately, like they knew I had nowhere to run. "You should have left," one of them said, and their voice was like an echo of an echo, words formed without proper breath behind them. "Curiosity is dangerous here. Makes you visible to things that prefer to stay hidden." They were close enough now that I could see their faces in my truck's lights. Human features, but assembled wrong, like someone had described a face to an artist who'd never seen one. "Where's Merritt?" I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. "Where are the others?" The middle figure tilted its head, considering. "Transitioning," it said simply. "From your world to ours, from your purpose to our needs. It's not painful, if that concerns you, more like sleeping while awake." I swung the wrench at the nearest one, connected solidly with what should have been a shoulder. It felt like hitting a bag of sand, giving but not breaking, absorbing the impact without damage. The figure didn't even step back, just looked at the wrench with something like curiosity. "Violence won't help," it said. "We're not here to hurt you. We're here to collect. The old truck needs drivers, and drivers need to disappear properly." "You're taking truckers," I said, pieces clicking together, making them vanish from rest stops, taking them somewhere. The figures exchanged looks that might have been amusement. "Not taking," one corrected, "recruiting. Your world has so many drivers, so many routes. We need guides who know the roads, who can navigate between spaces. The ones we take help us move through your infrastructure." "And if they refuse?" I asked, though I suspected I knew the answer. "No one refuses after the transition," the middle figure said. "The process removes that impulse along with others that would interfere. They become perfect drivers for our needs, never tired, never questioning, never trying to return home." Behind them, the old truck's engine suddenly rumbled to life, though no one was in the cab. The headlights came on, but the light they cast was wrong, too blue, too cold, showing things that weren't there in normal light. I could see shapes moving inside the cab, multiple figures where there should only be room for one or two. And in the driver's seat, barely visible through the windshield, was Merritt Cooley, hands on the wheel, staring straight ahead with empty eyes. "He's adjusting well," one of the figures noted. "Some resist more than others, but he seems naturally compliant. He'll make an excellent addition to our fleet." They started moving closer, again spreading out to cut off my escape routes. "You've seen too much now," the middle one said. "Learned too much. We can't let you leave with this knowledge." I ran. Not brave, not strategic, just pure panic running. Made it to my truck, dove through the door I'd thankfully left open, and slammed it shut. The engine was still running, and I threw it in gear, didn't care about anything but getting out of there. In my mirrors, I could see the figures standing calmly, not pursuing, just watching. And behind them, the old truck was following, Merritt's blank face visible in its headlights. I drove hard for 20 miles before I realized they weren't chasing me. Pulled into a well-lit gas station, hands shaking so bad I could barely hold my phone. Called 911, reported Merritt missing, gave them the rest stop location. They said they'd send someone to check, took my information, told me to stay where I was, but I couldn't. Kept seeing those figures, kept thinking about Merritt's empty eyes. The next morning, local news reported a trucker found dead at a rest stop on Highway 169. Heart attack, they said. Natural causes. They showed Merritt's photo, interviewed his company, talked about the dangers of driving long hours without rest. No mention of his truck being found empty with the door open. No mention of other missing truckers. No mention of an old truck with no plates. But I knew the truth. Merritt wasn't dead, not exactly. He was driving for them now, navigating between our world and wherever they came from. And somewhere out there, Eugene Vance was probably doing the same, along with those other 3 truckers and who knows how many more. All of them taken from rest stops, transitioned into something else, turned into drivers for things that shouldn't exist. I don't stop at rest stops anymore. If I need to sleep, I find a truck stop with lots of lights and people. If I absolutely have to use a rest stop, I keep the engine running, doors locked, and I'm gone in 5 minutes or less. Because I know they're out there, those figures with their wrong gaits and echo voices, looking for drivers to recruit, for people to transition. Nora Candler called me a week later. Don't know how she got my number. She said she was Merritt's sister, that she'd been tracking these disappearances for months, trying to find patterns. 3 truckers had been her brother's friends, had told him about strange things at rest stops before they vanished. She'd warned him to be careful, but he hadn't listened, thought she was being paranoid. They're not random, she told me. They target specific drivers, solo operators, no families, routes that take them through isolated areas. They study them first, learn their patterns, wait for the perfect opportunity. She had theories about what they were, where they came from, but no real answers. Just speculation and fear, and a growing list of missing truckers that nobody else seemed to notice or care about. She sent me information she'd gathered. Photos of abandoned trucks found at rest stops, all with doors open, personal items left behind. Police reports that mentioned everything except the strangeness, always concluding with natural causes or voluntary disappearance. And something else. Grainy security footage from a truck stop in Nebraska, showing an old truck with no plates passing through without stopping for fuel, with what looked like multiple figures crammed into the cab. The last thing she sent was a map. Red dots marked where truckers had disappeared, blue lines showing their usual routes. The pattern was clear. A corridor running through the Midwest, centered on Highway 169, but spreading like veins to other routes. And at the center of it all, that rest stop where Merritt had vanished, where I'd nearly been taken to. I changed my routes after that, stayed away from that corridor, but sometimes, late at night on empty highways, I see trucks that don't look right. Old models with too many people in the cab, driving too smooth, never stopping for way stations. And I wonder if one of them is Merritt, transformed into something else, ferrying things between worlds on routes that don't appear on any map. The wallet I found, Eugene Vance's wallet, I kept it. Don't know why, maybe as proof that I didn't imagine it all. Sometimes I look at that photo of his family, wonder if they ever found out what really happened to him. The business card for transitional services, I tried calling it once. The voice that answered wasn't human, couldn't have been. It asked for my location, my route, my truck model. I hung up and threw the phone away, bought a new one the next day. That's my story, the one I'll never tell at truck stops, never share with other drivers. Because talking about it makes it real, and making it real means acknowledging that our highways aren't just ours, that things use our infrastructure for their own purposes, taking our drivers when they need them, transitioning them into servants for their shadow transportation network. Somewhere tonight, a trucker is pulling into an empty rest stop, tired and needing sleep. Maybe they'll notice an old truck at the edge of the lot. Maybe they won't. Maybe they'll see figures moving wrong in the darkness. Maybe they'll just close their eyes and rest. And maybe, just maybe, they'll disappear like Merritt Cooley, like Eugene Vance, like all the others who stopped at the wrong place at the wrong time. The highways go on forever, connecting cities and towns, carrying commerce and dreams. But they also connect to other places, darker places, where old trucks drive impossible routes and transitioned drivers stare endlessly forward with empty eyes. I know because I've seen it, because I almost became part of it. And every time I pass a rest stop at night, I remember Merritt's still steaming coffee and the sound of an engine starting with no one in the cab. And I keep driving, always keep driving, never stopping in the dark places where the infrastructure of our world touches theirs.